Peace everyone, Unmask Art here, and welcome back to another pastel tutorial. Today we're going to be finishing our portrait of the adorable Nico. The last bit that we have to do on this project is usually what I refer to as the polishing stage. I'm just going to run back through some of my colors, introduce some toning colors, and then do the final flyaways and the individual hairs that really create that final touch of detail in the portrait. So I haven't added any new colors. Some of the toning colors I used in the eyes, so I'm just going to incorporate that blue into the fur. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back through with the 610 and just introduce a little bit more texture throughout the fur. So not really any individual hairs, but just more precise pencil strokes, really. Hope everyone is having a lovely day. Be sure to give the live stream a thumbs up. This live stream is, of course, part of the series of this project. If you're new to the channel or new to my live streams, just so you know, the entirety of this project can be viewed and followed as a tutorial, along with the reference photo and line art by joining the art club. Today's polishing stage live stream of this project will remain public. The tutorial part of this project is, of course, only available through the art club. Hey there, Claire, Victor, Chandri, Diane, Margaret. Good to see all of you. Got some nice weather today. It's very warm. Mainly what I'm doing here is trying to break up some of the fur around the edges of the shapes, because as we've worked through this entire project, I've really focused on establishing the shapes and the value, and I didn't really spend a lot of time precisely putting in fur texture. It's all about establishing the flow and then applying the appropriate colors and value. So I'm just going to run through pretty much everything, make sure the paper's very well covered, and establish a bit more texture throughout the fur using various dashed lines. And of course, if you have any questions for me, don't hesitate to ask. Happy to explain any and all things. So next week, I won't be streaming tomorrow, but next week we'll start a new colored pencil project and a new pastel project. The pastel project will be that strange animal that I mentioned yesterday. I forget the name once again, but that will be the next pastel project. And then for the colored pencil project, I haven't yet decided, but I think I might make it something kind of simple, like an apple or some other still life object. Perhaps I'll use the toned gray paper, the Strathmore toned gray. I think I still have some of that, so I'll have to look into whether or not I still have that paper, but we'll switch back to the Prismacolors for the next project, regardless of what I do. Give the Polychromos a little bit of a break since we've been using them for pretty much the entirety of this year so far up to this point. Excuse me, my left eye is just getting real itchy for some reason. Udon finally finished shedding yesterday. I was very pleased to wake up to him being done shedding, and he had a very successful shed. The last couple sheds have not been very good for him, so I was glad to see that he made it out of his skin all in one piece. So it was very nice to wake up to that. He is sound asleep now. Yes, daylight savings time next week. I believe it's this coming Sunday. I truthfully I never know when it happens because all of all of the things that I use to check the time automatically do it. So I don't even think about it. And most of the time, you guys point it out to me because it appears as though the stream is at a different time, since different parts of the world do daylight savings on different days, which is still baffling to me. Um, it's even more baffling than the idea of daylight savings time. But yeah, I do believe it is this Sunday. So next week, the live stream, I guess it would be 1 hour earlier for a lot of you that the stream happens. I think that's what's gonna happen, or something along those lines. A really important feature of what I'm doing right now. You can see down here now. It's not super obvious because it's not a hard line that separates the head from the body, but I do see this from time to time in pet portraits, and that is a really hard separation where it almost feels like the head and the body are disjointed. A really good way to bridge the gap between like these edges down here and the body so that it flows together nicer is to just create some squiggly diamonds that cut into the fur, sort of like this, and just create some shapes. Even if they're not there in the reference photo, by doing that, you're going to make that transition a lot more natural. And then when you introduce the flyaways and the all of the individual hairs, uh, you can overlap it in the other direction. So you'll bring some of the hairs down over top of the body, and that transition will look a lot more natural. And that goes for more more areas. You can definitely make that argument for the snout here and then the jaw. This is the same thing. I already added a lot of the jagged lines that go up into it, but once I add the individual hairs that come off of the mustache and like over top of the tongue, the brighter highlighted hairs and whatnot, that transition will look a lot more natural. And so it's okay to have it a bit blocky and a bit disjointed there. Just know that that's the method that I would recommend using to help create that natural division between certain parts of the body and head and face and all of that. Because you get that same kind of separation with legs and feet and really any part of the animal that the body part is overlapping. So there's a million different examples where one body part will be in front of another, and you want to create that separation, but you also don't want to make it look so disjointed that it feels kind of like a bad Photoshop job. So you don't have to create that natural transition right away. And then the way to do it is work your darker colors into the shape that is in front and then the lighter colors over top of the shape that's in the back. And that will help create those more natural looking transitions. All right, I think that's pretty good. I, you don't have to overdo it, um, and sometimes overdoing it can work against you. So I think that's good for this brown. If I were to continue doing it with just one color, then I'm starting to remove the other variations of browns, like the reds and the oranges. So I'm going to switch it up. I need to add the highlighted parts of the fur. I'm going to try to do this with two different colors to see how it works. I may incorporate white, but I may not. If I don't incorporate white, I will only use the 105 for the individual hairs and go from there. So this is going to be the really detailed hairs. Individual hairs are finally coming in, and I'm just going to flick some of these hairs throughout the fur. And the important feature of these hairs is that they break up the darker values. So if I were to just apply this color over here, it wouldn't really have a big effect. What you want to do is find areas where you can cut through the dark values of fur and add a little flyaway like this. That's where you're going to get, or that's where you're going to be able to create the depth of the hair texture. And also, you saw me use my finger there, but the paper blender is a really good tool. So, for instance, if I create like a little flyaway hair here, you can see that this hair sort of, it feels like it just starts out of nowhere. So what you do is you just gently blend the end, and that's going to create that natural taper. So it just looks like the hair is, it's just flying out, which is, the reason they're called flyaways. And the taper looks a lot more natural. So I'm just going to do that in a few spots. Try not to get too carried away with the hairs here. Any hair that you feel is a little bit too bright, just tap it a few times with the paper blender. You can do it with your finger, but I do recommend the paper blender as opposed to your finger, so just keep that in mind. These little hairs are going to add so much depth and so much texture to this portrait. I would say maybe 100 individual hairs is what I'll probably end up drawing. I'm not going to count them, but drawing 100 hairs is not a lot in comparison to the actual number of hairs a dog would have. And when you take if you go through the process that I lay out in any of my hair or fur projects, you'll always notice that the number of individual hairs that I do is very, very low because I don't want to spend all day drawing individual hairs in my projects. And if you do the initial stages, the blocking in stage and the blending stage and all of the other stages that I talk about throughout hair projects that involve hair, then you'll get the realistic texture and detail without drawing 5 million individual hairs. Instead, you can just draw like 100 and sometimes even less than that, depending on how much depth or realism you're trying to create. So just keep that in mind. I think that this color is going to work perfectly fine, and I don't see any reason that I would want to or need to use white to add additional hairs. I think that this one is perfectly fine, so I think I'll just stick with this color and skip the use of white. I don't think white is going to be a necessary color. With the blending tool, if you happen to make, a bit of a mistake with your flyaways, there is a lot of correctability to every line that you make just by using the blending tool to sort of dampen the obviousness of the line. Simple little blend of the line can make a really bad line look natural. So don't be afraid of messing up your individual flyaways because like I said, you can pretty much blend them away into completely unnoticeable. And uh, so you it does take a little bit of practice and skill to do the sweep, the quick sweeping motion of the flyaways, but I promise you that if you just commit to the line, if you commit to the flyaway, no matter what direction it sort of sweeps off to, it's going to look pretty natural. And if you feel like you messed it up a little bit, just use your blender and touch it up to the point that it just doesn't show up as much. And it will get lost in the uh, plethora of texture that you've created up to this point. So you don't have to feel like you messed it up because you have a flyaway that looks a little strange or whatever. Don't put too much emphasis on the precision of your flyaways because the reality is it's not that important for them to uh, be exactly in the flow or even be any measurement of perfect that you may have. Sometimes the worst ones that you end up drawing actually look the most natural simply because fur and hair just goes all over the place. All right, let's put a few up in the ear. There, nothing too fancy. Um, let's do, yeah, I guess I'll go back to the brown, the 610. I need to do the little flyaways off of the ear. I'm not going to do nearly as many as the reference photo shows because I think that um, going too crazy with the texture in the edge of the ear, it's rather unnecessary, first off, and the ears are far less important than the rest of the face. And I feel like if I add too much texture, it will just bring unnecessary amount of attention to the ears where it's really just not that important. So a few lines, maybe 20 of them there. And I think that about does it. I can put a few flyaways with this brown in some of the lighter parts of the fur just to give it one more level of texture. I think that's good. Now, the black for the whiskers. The whiskers are a little, they're not super obvious, so I'm just going to sort of put them in and not think about them too much. So that's about all you see on that side. And then on this side, you see them a little bit more. Maybe I'll do, just for a bit of symmetry, I'll do a little bit longer one there on the right side. And just to smooth them out a touch. Create that taper. Now for the toning stage, um, you can go back and forth between toning and adding the flyaways. Generally, I would recommend doing the toning stage before you add the flyaways. I sort of got ahead of myself there because I was using the brown to add some extra texture, and then I just moved right into adding the flyaways, and I sort of skipped over the toning stage a little bit, so that's my mistake. But I'm going to use the 440. This is the same blue that I used in the eyes, and I always am conscientious of reusing colors again throughout all of the artwork that I do. If I happen to use a color just even in one spot, I always make a conscious choice of utilizing that same color somewhere else in the image. Really a it's really one of the easiest ways to balance the color harmony throughout your artwork, aside from the fact that I've only used one, two, three, four, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I've only used 11 colors for this entire drawing. So using a smaller palette along with um, reusing colors is it's really the best way to create color harmony in your artwork. So what I'm going to do is in the transitions between highlights of the fur, I am going to incorporate a little bit of this 440 blue. And it's just going to make the fur look like it's being affected by the environment. This is the other thing that's really important when it comes to choosing the toning colors of your hair or fur. It is the best way to incorporate the environmental colors into your image, into your main subject, to make that main subject feel like it belongs in the environment that you put it in. So a really good example of this is when you add a background to your portrait. So I cannot tell you how many times I've seen a really good portrait with a horrendously chosen color for a background. Like when you use a reference photo and say the reference photo is just like a normal picture that you take of like a family member, outside a restaurant after a dinner or something. You just snap a photo and then years down the road you come across the photo and again and you feel motivated to use that picture as a portrait that you want to draw of the person or whatnot. And you don't want to incorporate the background. So you cut the background out, but you don't want to leave the background blank. So you choose sort of whatever color you're feeling in the moment to fill in the background. And what ends up happening when you don't think about the color enough is that the background and the main subject just feel disjointed, like they don't belong together because you've isolated the main subject from an environment that, maybe it's just like a normal daylight that the original photo is taken in. And so you have these warmer colors coming through. And because you're following the reference photo, you utilize those warm colors throughout your main subject, but then you change the background. You're like, oh, well, this person's favorite color was like a blue, so I'll use like a bluish gray color for the background. But if you contrast that cooler bluish tone of the background with the warmer colors that you would have ended up using in the portrait, the background can actually take away from the quality of the artwork simply because they don't line up. The color harmony is disjointed. And so this is the longest possible way for me to say any time you want to add a background to your artwork, make sure that either you use the background colors in your main subject or the colors in your main subject in the background. There has to be an overlap of color between the background and the main subject in order to create that color harmony. And so many times that is overlooked because people are just looking at their main subject and they're like, oh, what would make a cool background color for this portrait here? Maybe just a reddish color to sort of brighten up the reds in the fur or something along those lines. And I just pick like a bright red and I just throw it into the background. It's like the likelihood of it working out well is very, very low if I just sort of pick a color I think would look good, as opposed to utilizing either the color in the background into the main subject or vice versa. So either way, just keep those in mind, keep those ideas in mind anytime you incorporate a background into your portraits or really anything. It doesn't have to be a portrait. It could just be it could be quite literally any subject matter. And that's also a really, really good uh, tool for landscapes. So when you're doing landscapes, just keep using the same like 7 or 8 colors. Just keep using the same 7 or 8 colors. And then if you want to incorporate a special color to bring attention to like a main subject, you can localize that color. But I would recommend being cautious with the amount of localization. So like if you have like this really cool landscape and you want this red barn because that's common, right? Just sticking out, in the distance or whatever. Just be cautious of how red you make the barn because sometimes you don't need it to be, the most vibrant red uh, available. Sometimes you just need it to be a little, just a touch of red for it to really stand out and still look natural. All right. Can we just all take a moment to appreciate how much cooler the fur looks because I've just incorporated this blue? I think the transition between these reds into the sort of grayish tans and just the sprinkle of blue throughout the fur, especially down here around the neck, I think it just makes the hair look so much richer and shinier. And the the use of the blue comes from my general rules since it's sort of localized to just the nose and the eyes, and I wanted to reuse it in some way. The toning color can just drastically change the way your hair and fur looks. And I didn't have to use this blue. I could have just kept the blue here and even used like the pinkish color from the tongue and it would have given the portrait a completely different feel. Uh, anytime you're doing anytime you're doing fur or hair, I highly recommend you experiment with the toning colors that you choose. Just draw like the same hair over and over again a couple times or whatnot, and then just switch out the toning color that you use. And just to be clear, you can do toning with colored pencils or watercolor or acrylic or oil or whatnot. The toning color is just the transition between the highlights and the mid-tone shadows. So anywhere the brightest part of the hair or fur transitions into the darker areas, that transitionary color, that's the toning color. If you wanted to create like a vibrant copper red hair, then the vibrant copper color is going to be the transitionary color between the highlights and the midtones and shadows. And the same thing with like golden, platinum, blonde. You're going to use that high intensity yellow only in the transitions of the highlights and the midtones. So that's where the toning color comes into play. Just to clarify that, you're not going to you're not going to throw it everywhere. You only want it to be in those transitions. It's sort of just a hidden part of where the true hair color comes from, and it makes a huge difference in my opinion. All right, the last thing I'm going to do, just going to turn this recording off. I don't need to record anymore. Um, I'm going to just clean up the outside of the paper a little bit before removing the tape. There's I mean, removing the tape, it's there's nothing really to it, since there's no background or anything. So removing the tape isn't as satisfying on this project because there's no background. But I do want to clean up a little bit of the excess dust, and the easiest way to do that is to just use my kneaded eraser here and roll it throughout the background. The next pastel project is another animal, and I can't remember the name. It's I guess while I'm doing this, I can pull it up. It's a weird animal. I've never seen it before. Kind of looks like a slow loris meets a bat plus a rat. It's a tarsier or tarsier. I'm gonna have to look up the pronunciation of that animal since I'm gonna be saying it a lot. I imagine that as I'm working through that project, anybody that comes in may end up asking what kind of animal it is that I'm drawing or whatever. Uh, so I ought to know how to say it properly. I haven't taken the time to learn how to say it properly yet because I haven't started working on it, but yeah, tarsier or tarsier or something along those lines. I don't even know where it's from in the world. If I had to guess, I'd say it's from Asia. It because it resembles some of those strange like Southeast Asia animals, like the slow loris. It looks a lot like a slow loris, but only if the slow loris mated with a rat that also mated with a bat. It's got like bat ears, rat tail, slow loris face. It's sort of weird. Okay, I think that's clean enough. So I'm just going to untape this, and you guys can admire the finished product without tape. I hope that you guys have enjoyed watching this project come to life. This is a very special project for me since it is for my sister and, of course, one of my favorite dogs of all time. Nico will be forever missed, but I have no doubts that he lived the happiest life a dog could live. And I'm so glad that I got a chance to see him one last time while I was home. All right, so here it is. Here is the final portrait of little Nico with his happiest of face. Again, thank you all so much for coming by and hanging out and working through this project with me. Admittedly, emotionally it was a little difficult for me. I'm not gonna lie, it really was. But yes, thank you all so much. Yeah, I just have to mail it now. All right. You all have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you again for watching. Don't forget to give the live stream a thumbs up before you go, and I will see you on Monday. Take care. Peace.